I'm gonna go and
well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Village Voices. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Trudy Peterson, and I coordinate Village Voices for Capitol Hill Village. We are recording this session, so it will be available on our village social media sources. So we do ask that you mute yourself while the recording is in progress and while our speaker is talking. If you have a question that you're just dying to ask and you're afraid you'll forget it by the end of the talk, we encourage you to use the chat. And Mary Bloodworth and I will both be monitoring the chat, trying to make sure we don't forget those questions that you're asking along the way. I want to thank Mary Bloodworth, who does all the tech support for us, Judy Berman, who of course manages the village for all of us, and Mae Jean Daniels and Karen Stuck, who do such a good job of advertising these sessions for us. So I do, before we begin, also want to remind you that there are 2 more programs in our spring session. In May, we have Jeffrey Cabaservice, and he wrote a book on the history of the Republican Party. And so he's going to be talking about 3 paths for the party, Republican roads in 2022, which for all of you political junkies, that should be a lot of fun. And then in June, we will have Carol Grodzins, who is a self-declared social entrepreneur. And she's going to talk about the difference between the citizen sector, the private sector, and the public sector. And that will be then our June and the final one for this season of Village Voices. Tonight we have with us Tony Quinn. Tony's a lawyer. And so living with one, I know they like to talk. But Tony's special in that he's not just a lawyer. He's also an actor, couldn't get away from the stage. But with his voice, he also has done commercials, ads, voiceovers. And then somehow he got started with the Library of Congress doing audiobooks. And from that, he has also done commercial audiobooks. So tonight, we're going to ask him if he's read any good books lately. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Trudy. So I am actually reading a great book right now called Chasing the Scream. And it hits upon what I do. For many years, I was a criminal prosecutor. And this talks about the war on drugs, but from a different perspective. I encourage you to read it. It's pretty fantastic. I'm not going to read it professionally, though. I guess a little bit of background about me. I was born in New York to a former model and a television executive. So I was sort of destined to do this type of thing. With the downside, though, I'm quite tall. I'm 6'7". So when I was looking for parts, there aren't that many roles for 6'7" people because I don't play basketball very well. So I went to boarding school and then I went to college where I continued acting. And during the summers of both and then law school, I worked at a summer stock theater up in Vermont. I was able to work with some fantastic actors there and throughout. The theater up there was opened in 1937 and has been called the most beautiful theater in New England. Sam Lloyd, the actor, Christopher Lloyd's brother, Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future, he and Sam's son, Sammy Lloyd, who also is a television actor, all worked up there. It's become a much better place after my departure. The productions are higher value. But you'll see as I go through things, that's true with just about everything. So I went to college at Amherst College and was an English major. And the default option for English majors at the time was law school because I couldn't really do math. So banking was out. I went to Emory Law School in Atlanta, where I was unable to write onto the law review, which is a very big thing. I therefore auditioned for the Atlanta Shakespeare Company and was able to play with them pretty much from their inception. They were founded in 1984, and I auditioned with them shortly thereafter, and we did the first Atlanta Shakespeare Festival. They've modified into a much better theater called the Shakespeare Tavern, and they're well renowned as a region. But when I graduated from law school, I thought I had put childish things behind me. I met my wife, who's over across the hall on another camera. You can say wave Ann. And so I thought it was done with it. I came, and we went to theater productions, and I always had the yearning to go back. And then Gary Peterson might remember a fellow by the name of Dick Lawn from the Environment and Natural Resources Division where I was working, and they were looking for a narrator. Yeah, they were looking for narrators to do some training videos. So I popped back into that, did it there, and then I was being asked to do emceeing across the city by various charities and organizations. And so rather than be in front on the stage, I was a little bit behind the stage doing what people refer to as the voice of God. You know, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats, stuff like that. I continued on with that. And then about in 2008, a friend of mine from college decided to call me up. He said, I've written a part in a movie, and rather than try to describe the person, would you play it, because it's essentially you. Now, this guy's a guy named Howie Gould. Howie went from college, we were great friends. He was a playwright and a very funny fellow. He went to Madison Avenue and earned several Clio Awards for advertising. Then he changed paths and went to California to become what is called a showrunner, essentially a screenwriter for sitcoms. He worked for Sybil Shepherd and Jeff Foxworthy and Tim Allen. And the movie he asked me to be in was a Tim Allen vehicle, and he wanted me to be a cop. So like I said before, being a 6'7" guy, there aren't a whole lot of roles on the stage. I mean, there are cops and lawyers and judges, senators, coaches, and that's about it. We're not going to play any ingenue. We're not going to be the romantic lead. So I did the film with them, and that sort of reinvigorated me. My wife was kind enough to let me do it. And after that, I looked into narrating audiobooks. It was sort of a beginning of an industry. Back when I first started doing all this stuff, you used to have to take a razor and cut tape, like a cassette tape, and then piece them together, just like people did with film. Well, as computers have become more advanced, it's so much easier to do it digitally than it was to do it in an analog way. So everybody has the capability to record great voice work on their own computer. There's an upside and a downside. It means the barriers to entry are very low, but it also means that the barriers to entry are very low. So you're going to have people with all different calibers of voices and professionalism in it. I neglected to say that when I was working in summer stock, I sort of worked my way as an apprentice into the Actors Equity, which is the theater union for stage actors. You used to have to earn so many points, and you would get a point for each role that was playing for a period of time. So I had my equity card, but when I worked for Howie's movie, I was able to get my SAG card, which was then the Screen Actors Guild. And then at the time there was a third union called AFTRA, the American Federation of Radio and Television Actors, which was predominantly news people and radio broadcasters. SAG and AFTRA have merged recently, and they have jurisdiction. SAG-AFTRA has jurisdiction over recordings like this, and audiobooks, and songs, and television, and various things like that. So as a member of that, they've been able to negotiate a pretty decent base pay for audiobooks. they don't cover all of the audio houses. So there's another option on it as well. So I can either get paid by the finished hour, which is, I'll get into that and tell you about it, but I can get paid by the finished hour, or I can take a sort of a profit share agreement and take money off the back end as a deal with the author or the publisher. So saying like, I won't charge you upfront, or I'll charge you upfront a little bit, as long as I get points off the back end. That is a percentage of the sales. So that's pretty great right now, because as I build a portfolio, I get a little bit of a residual that sort of shows up and gives me enough money for a cup of coffee at Starbucks every other year. About not a great deal of money on that. But so that's sort of how I got here. I've been able to act on the stage because I had some very great supervisors at the Department of Justice who also had been screenwriters and also had a desire to stay theatrical. And as a trial lawyer, I guess I'm a storyteller in the best possible way. I've done criminal law for a long time. I've just recently switched over to the civil side. And it all comes down to being able to relate to an audience, whether it's a jury or a judge, and tell them what happened and try to convey it in the most convincing and appealable way that you can. So the background as an actor sort of put me here today. And I guess that's it. Now, with regard to audiobooks, it's a huge market now. It did not exist for a long time, or if you remember programs like Dove Books and Books on Tape, you would go and buy a cassette and put it in your car and listen to it on a long drive. But the cassettes were, a lot. They took up a lot of room. And once you listened to it, you had, half a dozen cassettes sitting around. They've gone, then after that, they went, of course, to CDs, and now everything's digital. So the barrier to entry on that is pretty great too, because you can sign up with any number of companies or the libraries and get audiobooks for virtually nothing. And so that's an upside and a downside. The market is huge, but the profit for narrators is not. What it also does is it doesn't take up shelf space for distributors either, because it's all digitized. So they really don't have to spend a lot of money on it, and they don't tend to market it too much as well. A lot of the bestsellers come out simultaneously with the hardcover book, and then also an audiobook to go with it. And the top books get great people narrating them. There's going to be, there's Steven Weber, who used to play on Wings, has done a series of books for a guy named Harlan Coben. Now, Harlan Coben and I went to college together, and he actually teased me and says, who's a good audiobook narrator, expecting me to say me. I didn't, and I don't have that job. I also, there's a Chris Bojalian is another author, and he's fantastic. He hasn't hired me either. So my friends don't hire me, but they're still my friends, the authors I have known. I started working with what is now called Learning Ally. It had been, prior to that, it had been reading for the dyslexic and the deaf and the blind. And that's a great organization. It's up on off of Fessenden Street. They have a beautiful set of studios, and they take people in to do various tasks, not just narrators, but people who serve as proofers. And a proofer is a person who listens to the audio tape that I would cut and would say, hey, at 16 minutes and 13 seconds, you said, go back and record it. And I'll show you some of the clips we get. I actually hire somebody to do this for me, because you tend to overlook errors you make in your own voice. So that's one of the aspects you could do at Learning Ally. And I've read textbooks there, which are scintillating, usually business law, because nobody else wants to do it, or law books. All the novels and interesting stuff get taken up first, but students who are visually impaired or have a difficulty reading are thankful to have this done. And it gave me a lot of traction. It gave me a lot of time in the booth to get used to things and test out my my aptitude for it. One of the trainers I first worked with said, you reading audiobooks is not for everybody. So in order to determine if it is, I want you to go get a chair and face a corner and read for 3 hours out loud. And that's about it. That's what I do. I can only read for about 3 hours. My voice won't last. It changes too much over the course of 3 hours. And so for every 3 hours of booth time, I can generate about 1 finished hour. And when I first mentioned this, the pay is by the finished hour. It's not pay by booth time like other voice work is. Other voice work is you get paid not so much for the finished spot, but paid for the time you spend in the booth or on a set or on stage, or how many weeks, and it goes like that. Trudy, were there any questions yet?
No, not yet. Just
Okay.
keep on.
Okay, I'll keep on. There's a great book out about the history of audiobooks, and it's sort of fascinating. When you go back, you think in the 1870s, Edison recorded "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on his device. So that really is the first audiobook over time. When we went to cassettes, like I said, there were some great books back then, but the number of people doing it, actually recording, was small. You'd get, like a James Earl Jones or the top names, but there was not a market for people like me to just read books. The Library of Congress opened up, and they have also done it as well to assist with the people who are visually impaired. So they have, the Library of Congress does recordings. And then on the commercial side, there are any number of houses that do this. I work with one called Spoken Realms. It used to, God bless you, Spoken Realms, and they will let me narrate pretty much any book in the public domain that I ask the opportunity to. So I did some Jack London, which was fun. I really enjoyed sort of, to get back and read those again. When I read an audiobook, it's not just a one and done. It takes a lot of time at the front end, and then the recording takes some time. And then at the back end, I have done it myself, but there are people who are much better, and my time is a little bit more valuable. So I send it out to be mastered and edited and made to sound the same all throughout. And they cut it up and make sure that I haven't made many recording glitches or any of the like. The prepping of a book is kind of fun, though. I like nonfiction. I narrated a book on James Audubon not too long ago, and the problem is the author was a professor, and he put words together that don't belong together in the spoken tongue. He had something called the ornithological biology, which took me about a day to get out. Now I can't stop talking about it. So the sentences that the professor spoke were filled with clauses and parens and dashes, which take your breath away in a very real sense. Trying to get through one of those sentences was grueling. And so every once in a while, Anne will hear a choice word pierce the room, saying, and then I have to go out and walk around to try to get it back, because every so often I get tongue-tied and I start being unable to read the written word. And I go and I listen to it and I stop and go back. The recording is done on a program. I have several programs. If I could, I'll share the screen. Excuse me, I got to come up close so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to show you one of the programs that I've used. Oh, it's not coming. I'm not sure if my share screen is working. Oh, well. I use a program called Studio One, which allows me to do something called punch and roll. And punch and roll is a way that I can edit while I'm recording. I will record a word, and instead of saying Mary had a little lamb, I'll say something like Mary had some little lambs. I made a mistake. I push a button, it stops the recording. I go back, use the cursor to go back to where my breath sounds right, and I can begin it over and re-record that line. And that's called punch and roll. That's the industry standard now. And that's what all of the big audio houses like Random House want. They wanted punch and roll, sort of a rough edit on it. Then they will have their proofers listen to it and send back correction sheets. I then drop in the corrections in files and do it that way. Now, audiobooks is only part of what I'm doing too. There are about 10 areas of voiceover. And as my mom never said this, but a lot of my friends did. As you can tell, I have a face for radio, which was another reason I'm no longer really a popular screen actor. One short story. When I worked at the theater up in Vermont, it was owned by a great guy named Walter Boughton. And prior to a matinee, there were some ladies looking at the headshots that are outside of any theater, and they saw my name. They say, "Oh, is he Anthony Quinn's son?" So the producer, not to miss a buck in any way, in a Barnum-like geste, said he'd prefer we not say. So he was less. Some people would say that's misleading. Others would say that's very, very good marketing. So people in Vermont still think I'm Anthony Quinn's son. Somebody even wrote to me upon the death of Francisco and said, "I'm sorry about your brother." I had no idea what he was talking about. But so the different types, I'm going to read off my note here, the different types of categories, about 10. There's, of course, animation, which is the cartoons everybody, including me, likes to watch. Those require a lot of work because they are expressive and active, and you're usually not talking in your natural voice, so it's a little bit of a strain. That is a very niche industry, and it's predominantly out of California because that's where most of the work is being done. Atlanta's come into it as well right lately. Then every time you listen to the radio or the television, you hear a commercial, and commercials are the bread and butter for a lot of people, but they're subject to advertising desires and what people think other people want to hear. So there's a young and conversational and other things like that. I have a voice that has been classified as announcery, like a Don Pardo or a Don LaFontaine, the old classical voice you used to hear. People don't like that in commercials anymore. So that market is pretty much closed to me, unless, I'm selling a Rolex or a Jaguar, which they haven't called, so don't listen for me there. Then, of course, there's narration, and narration takes many forms. Everything from the guy on Oak Island saying aspects of what's going on one of the TV shows on the Discovery Network, or a long form narration like Marlon Perkins used to do on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. We're going to sit back here now and watch as Jim wrestles the anaconda. That type of voice in the background is the narration, and narration comes across in various ways. That's a different niche than the audiobooks, which we were talking about. There's also video games and interactive, huge market. And the video games, again, are all over the place. But you have a lot of people going, and dying they die on the video game. So you have to have, 6 or 8 ways of dying as a character or an alien or whatever, whoever it is. The next category is e-learning. And I'm sure certainly everybody who works for the government gets these come November or December. And it's the videos on computer safety now and other things on the sexual harassment, not the how-tos, but videos on what you're supposed to do and what your requirements are. Continuing legal education, real estate, virtually all of these have something. And what they are is a slide will pop up and somebody will read it, and then there'll be a test at it. And the voice that I've done a number of these for some hotels when they're changing their marketing. So you would say, now press the next slide. In order to have a meeting, you would do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they would all come up. Your face wouldn't show, but the slides would read through. So e-learning is a huge market, and it covers a lot of work that I end up doing. One form of narration is corporate narration, and these are used for, shareholders reports or the like, or when a new product comes out. The medical field was doing a lot of corporate narration in COVID. There was a lot of COVID e-learning as well as to how you were supposed to address certain things and certain situations given that were going on. That's corporate narration. Everybody knows about the movie trailer. There was a fellow named Don LaFontaine who was the greatest, and he was the guy who coined "in a world." So when you're watching the previews for movies, you would say, "In a world where men have lost their desire to live." That's the trailers. That's a very tight market and hard to get into. The people who sell those and make those like the same group of people. Today, there's a fellow named Joe Cipriano, and he's pretty much cornered the market on most of those. They also move into some try to move into other ones as well. There's promo, and promo is both radio and television. And it goes something like this: tonight on Desperate Housewives. And the person who does those is always available, and he or she will record a series of those for each of the markets. So tonight on WABC News at 7 is the promo work. Announcing is everything from baseball parks to hockey games to funerals to gatherings at malls. There's a lot of that work, and I've done a lot of it. Opening up of buildings, opening up of parades. That announcing is always going to be there, and it's always going to need somewhat of a voice like mine, somewhat commanding. You can also record it at a theater. Please silence your cell phones, or the part of Falstaff will be played by. So those are, in general, are the various types of, audio voiceover work. I wanted to talk to you a little. Yes,
Tony,
sure, Trudy.
You got a question, and let's
Sure.
take it right now because it kind of fits in. Patricia Malumbi says, "What do you do to care for your vocal cords?"
That's a great question. So it's you have to warm up, just like anything else. It's a series. Your vocal cords are a series of muscles, so you have to get into a natural place. I record sitting down because standing up there isn't a booth tall enough. And it sounds very weird when I rub my head up against the ceiling of my booth. It's only just a little bit taller than I am. So I warm up in an actual warm up. I get a little physical and get my breath going. A lot of people like to steam, take a hot steam shower to steam the vocal cords looser that way. Hydration is a critical element. Just like, when you get tired, your voice starts getting crackly because you're thirsty. Well, the talking this much, keeping your mouth open and articulating takes a lot of moisture out of the mouth. And then as it comes out of the mouth, it comes out of the throat as well. So hydration, I think, is the biggest aspect of keeping your voice and vocal system healthy. They just have to also be in shape. The endurance is a little difficult as well, because there's a connection between the eyes and the mouth that sort of shorts out after about 3 hours for me. There are people, see, there I go. There are people who can do it for hours upon hours, but it's very, very difficult. And they've become like athletes, trained it a lot better. Is that your answer? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, okay, good, good, sure. So you'll see though that people who do audiobook narration are somewhat strange. We have get-togethers various times. There's an audiobook publishing association, and we're very much somewhat loners who like to tell stories. And it's still acting, but it's acting in a different way. I think, the most fun acting for me is on a stage, because you get immediate feedback. You're telling a story to a group of people in a way that goes back to the Greeks, if not, and before. Standing in a place with a group of people, helping them emote, pulling feelings from them based upon your words and actions in an immediate sense. Film and television are once removed from that. You're still working with other people, but the audience is not necessarily there. For film, certainly, you don't know how it's going to be until it hits the audience. I mean, the director and the sound people and the script supervisor, everybody else has a feeling of what it is, but they don't clap, they don't applaud, and they don't really give you immediate feedback on how well you're doing, like an audience would. In a jury trial, there's the same type of thing. You can see expressions from the jury and the judge, but you don't know until they go into that room in the back and come back out as to whether you convinced them. So that's yet one more step removed from the stage. And then, of course, audio work like this, reading audiobook narration, I don't have anybody to read against. I'm talking to myself, hoping I sound right, making my own directorial decisions as a loner. So I use the experience I've gotten from what other people would say to do, and help me go through. But there is no reaction to it. And when somebody said, "I like that book that you narrated," that was done 3 years ago, and I don't really remember it. I remember the book, I remember the time in the booth, but I don't remember certain aspects of it. And so again, that's one more step removed from, the real stage acting. It gets a little difficult that way, I think. As to equipment. So, like I said, this is. Oh, sure.
Let me ask you a quickie.
Sure.
Let me ask you a quick question. Do you get any choice of what books you read if you're reading for, say, the Library of Congress? Or do you suggest them? Can you turn them down?
So in places like the Library of Congress and the Learning Ally, there's a series of books. There's books sitting there, and they have a queue, and sometimes they pick you, but more often than not, you have a stack from which you can choose. I don't get to say, I'm not going to read the next Stephen King novel. That one is being sold to somebody else. They're going to use it, and it's going to be somebody fantastic, a well-known name, Donald Sutherland or somebody will be doing those. So no, I don't really get to choose those. However, if it's a book in the public domain, I can approach one of my producing friends and ask, would it be okay with you if I narrate My Antonia, which I'm doing, by Willa Cather? And he said, sure. And a book like that, I don't have a deadline on necessarily. I have a self-imposed deadline, but because for a long time, they put it on sale, doesn't really matter. unless it's going to be a Christmas gift. And so there's a push around this time to try to get, well, several months before Christmas time in order to get a book on the market by Christmas for other people to take. So the answer is no, I don't get to choose. The people who are really high in the profession do, though. And I'm not the kind of guy to turn down work either. If it comes my way and somebody wants me to read it, I will. I've done a couple of books that haven't sold very well. I did one, yeah, this is so odd. I did a book on biology, sort of a primer on biology. It is by far my selling book. And I had to ask my then 6th grade son, how did you pronounce mitochondria? Right? I have known nothing about this. So being an English major, that is, not a biologist. So I asked them and they said, I go, Jamie, Elizabeth, how do you pronounce this? And they go, this way. It helped a lot. It helps to have people who can work on pronunciations. In a book like My Antonia, they ask for accents. And with regard to accents, I can't be a guy from Edinburgh. I just can't be, because the guy from Edinburgh is the guy from Edinburgh. And he sounds like a guy from Edinburgh. You can tell what corner he is from in Edinburgh. So if they want a Scottish accent, they'll get a Scottish guy. In an audiobook, though, you have to sort of hint at it with just a little bit of an inflection, because there'll always be somebody who is from Edinburgh who said, well, you pronounced that wrong. Something along those lines. And it doesn't go that well. That leads to a funny story. It didn't happen to me, but a person claims that they narrated a whole book and finished it with all the characters. And when they got to the end, the book tailed off with and the protagonist went to his long home outside of Dublin. So the guy realized he should have had an Irish brogue all the way through the book. So I don't know if that's an apocryphal story, but it certainly is a nightmare. And it's one of the reasons you kind of have to read the whole book before you get in it. You also want to know the pacing and the acts and how the arcs of the characters flow in order to get a feel of the book. I've never been able to read it once. Short stories maybe, but I always have to read it once before, probably twice or 3 times, figuring out the phrasing, how I'm going to hit it, getting the emotions, and then I can record it. And even the 3rd or 4th time when I'm recording it, of reading, I don't necessarily like it, or I find a new idea, and then I have to go back a little bit. I was going to see, let me see if I can share the screen. I was going to show you some of the books that are available now to be narrated. Let's see if that's working. I take you're not seeing anything on my screen, are you? No.
Do you have multiple screens, Tony?
I don't. I have the one screen.
Oh.
So let me see. Hold on. Let me see if I can lower this down. Reduce this a little bit. No. Well, I'm sorry. I can't quite do that. I was going to show you there's a Audible, which is one of the big distribution houses, has its own production house, and then it also serves as a clearinghouse called ACX. So if you were to go to www.acx.com, you could sign up and to either have your book read as a writer and select people who would audition for it, or you could be like me and have a platform there where people can hear my voice and either reach out to me. I see a question. I can't quite read it. Trudy, is that a question?
You've got one. It's which book that you read is your favorite?
So thanks for asking. I really, really liked Jack London because it had been underread. I read a book called The Road by Jack London. It was arguably not autobiographical, although written in that way. Um, and it talks about his journey across America. Um, it it serves as a travel log and a growth of this character. He talks about hopping trains and living as a hobo across the country, and various times in a Jack London-esque way, how he met people and what he saw. So I think that was fun. I like that one a lot. The most meaningful book I've read was a book called Spear Carrier in a Backwater War. Um, and it happened purely by chance. The author, a guy named Ed Larson, who unfortunately just passed away, was a pilot in World War II, and he served in the China-Burma-India Theater of Operations, which is where my father had flown as well. And so I thought I'd like to learn a little bit about this. He writes, as did Gant in Silent is the Hunter. He talks about flying over the Himalayas in an uninsulated plane, which is what my father had done as well. So I started working with Ed and his publisher, and I talked with him, and we became pretty fast friends. And it turns out that he had completed flight school 1 month before my father had. And so reading these stories about the bases in Kunming and Chennai and the bases he had flown about gave me sort of a new appreciation for what my father was able to accomplish. And the risks over there during World War II of these people who really were flying transport. They weren't in fighters. They didn't have fighter escorts. They were moving fuel and munitions and people and provisions to the front to help with Chiang Kai-shek's army and maintain all of the roads open there. When the Burma Road closed, this was the way that provisions got there. So we talked about it, and he didn't know my dad, but they flew the same missions. My father didn't talk about his time over there. All I knew about was that he didn't eat Indian food. I guess probably because he knew what went into it. And he didn't really care for Chinese food either, because I guess he knew what really went into Chinese food. But what I was able to show with Ed was I found my father's discharge DD-214, which showed the types of engines and aircraft he was authorized to fly. It showed his bases, where he was based and when he went in and when he went out, and it showed his commendations. My father was wounded and also received the Distinguished Flying Cross with an oak leaf cluster, and the air medals and some other things as well. Now, a number of men, it was only men then, who flew that theater of operations were put in by the Army Air Corps for distinguished service, distinguished flying crosses, because of the outright incredibly hazardous nature of flying. There was one particular day that in history, I think it was at some date in January, where 6 aircraft were lost. This is just people going on. And this is an operation similar to the Berlin airlift that was 24/7. Once you landed, you took off. And once you refueled, you took off again. So the men would stop and the plane would keep going. And the crew had no munitions in it. It had a pilot and a co-pilot, probably a navigator, and a couple of tech sergeants to handle the gear. And that was it. But it was cold. Dad would tell me he would take off in his boxer shorts, and by the time he got to altitude, he had everything he could wear on, including the leather fur-lined jackets, sheer jackets. So that was the most meaningful book I narrated. It was a great story of a great man of the greatest generation. And Ed lived in Santa Cruz, California, where our son Jamie is in college. And I had hoped that Jamie would get to meet him, but because of COVID, Jamie didn't get out there until after Ed passed. Jamie did go to Ed's wake, though. Fiction is fun. I like narrating fiction. I did a book on I don't know if anybody knows this genre of fiction called steampunk. It's really weird. So these people all live in a blimp, right? It's it's got a very strange looking feel to it. But these guys live in a super blimp, and they're trying to save the world from some other alien force. And it's a post-apocalyptic feel, sort of a Mad Max thing. Now, the book was fun to read. It had different names, but because it takes place in its own universe, nobody really had an accent. So I started tossing accents in there. I had one guy talk German just because I thought it'd be fun. And then I had a Frenchman. He was in there too. He was a different character. And I just, played around with the voices, and the author goes, I had no idea that guy sounded like that. And because the fellow makes up words, I have no idea how to pronounce them. I can't even look them up. So he was, telling me, what does this word mean? And how do you say it? So I was working back and forth with the author of that book. Now, I messed up that one a little bit because I was unable to narrate the sequel. And so it went to a guy named Ed Bray. Ed Bray narrated The Martian before the movie came out. He is phenomenal. And so that guy, the author, traded up, I think, for that. He got a much better reader as well. But it's fun. Fiction's fun because you get to, sort of play a little bit. Just like anything else, the playwright will give you what they think the play is, and then the director will give you what they think the play is, and then the actor will give you what he thinks or she thinks the play is. And so as both as the director and actor and producer, I get to pick sort of what I want in my interpretation. I come up with my own interpretation of a fiction piece.
Let's see if we've got any hands who want to ask questions. Just take a minute.
Okay, thanks, Trudy.
I want to look at gallery here.
Are they sleeping, Trudy? Did I put everybody to sleep, I think?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And Mike Grace, does Mike Grace have his hand up? Yeah.
I do.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. I listened to the Harry Potter books on tape, and I think the man who recorded them was James Dale, maybe that name's.
That is correct. So yeah, James.
I heard that he had 110 characters that he played in that, and I just wondered, I'd like to have you comment on that.
So that's right. You're 100% correct on that. James Dale is, I don't know if you remember the stage play Barnum. He was an actor from that, and he was a stage actor with a great repertoire and a huge history. He did have 110 different characters, each with his or her own voice. Now, how do you keep track of something like that? The way he did it, from what I understand, is he would find character A, Harry Potter, and he'd record a little bit of a clip using the same, like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy brown dog, like you would in typing. But he had a phrase, and he would record it for each one of these characters and then store that audio file somewhere else. So that if Dumbledore, some other character who's not a big one, came up again in book 6, he was able to find it and remember what it sounded like. But yeah, that's really great work. And he did a fantastic job listening to that. It's really hard to put down, I think. What a great actor. uh, there's stuff that you impress, and it's like when you play golf, watching golf on TV, you go, that's a nice shot, until you try to play golf. So once you try to narrate like this, you see somebody do that and you go, that is just otherworldly.
Nancy Hartnagel had a hand up.
Let me unmute myself. There we go.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Tony. Hi,
How are
Mike.
you?
Good. Good. Thanks. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Tony, I wonder how you handle feminine voices. Is there a trick to that? I mean, sometimes I'm fascinated at how different a male narrator will be with several feminine voices in the same book.
So I can't get my voice. If I start sounding like a falsetto, it takes you out of the moment. So I narrate with a woman's voice a little breathier than a man's. I would, aspirate a little bit and go a little softer. Now I'm still in a very much of a bass tone range, but I think it conveys perhaps a different feel. And so it's a syncopation, maybe. It's just a different way of differentiating it. I'll never be confused for a woman's voice, but as long as it gives you sort of the suspension of disbelief for a moment, that's really all I'm striving for doing this. If they wanted a woman to narrate it, they would have cast a woman. What they're doing a lot now, though, is casting I'm not sure what he's co-narrators, a man and a woman, to do it. That's murder to record, right? To record a conversation like that, or to record a narrator going, and then she said, and then you have to break it, and then the woman comes in. So it depends also on the perspective from which the piece is written.
I think Suzanne also had her hand up for this.
No, I was clapping or saying good job.
Thank you. Something just popped up.
Yeah,
on the
you've got a
question.
comment. You have a wonderful voice. There is not the booming that obscures the words that I sometimes encounter. Being 82, I've lost a lot of the higher frequencies. I listen to a lot of books from the library.
That's great. Thank you for listening to books. I think it's a great opportunity, audiobooks. Some people, I think there's going to be purists who say, well, you never read the book, you just listen to it. But you get a lot more out of it. I was able to turn our son, Jamie, on to David Foster Wallace by listening to the Broom of the System in our car. So he went and finished it because he was so intrigued with it. Now, I don't know many 19 or 20-year-olds who are into David Foster Wallace. By the way, so David Foster Wallace and I were in the same freshman class at college, and we were in English together. And we had Professor Bruss was doing something. She asked David Foster Wallace to read something. And it was at that moment in September of 1984 that I realized, holy God, what am I doing here? This guy is brilliant. And then, of course, he went on to write a lot of really great stuff, but he was a terrifyingly brilliant guy. Sorry
Here's
for that
another
aside.
question, and it's,
Sure.
can you sing?
Well, that's debatable. I think I can. I used to sing. I used to do, when I was doing summer stock theater, we all did musicals. So I have often walked down that street before. I think I do a little bit more spoken word, sort of a, perhaps in My Fair Lady-ish way. I did sing, and I can sing, and I have sung. Some people prefer that I no longer attempt it, though.
Is there a book after My Antonia that you would really like to record that you never have?
So I'm looking again through the public domain. There are, I think I'd like to do, I don't want to do the Jack London White Fang or Call of the Wild, because that's been done so many times. I think what I'd like to do are some of Jack London short stories. My mom was from the Bay Area, and I remember her showing me, Jack London Wharf or whatever it is. I always sort of had that desire to be an outdoorsman as well, to sort of go and hang it all up. So I kind of I'd like to jump down that. I don't have anything. I mean, there are some of the current fiction I'd love to do, some crime novels. Um, I love histories, though. There was an actor by the name of Ed Herman who I had the good fortune to meet, and he sort of convinced me to continue this. He has narrated some of the finest stuff. He narrated Boys in the Boat, about the crew team from Washington that competed in Hitler's Olympics. And the way he describes the scene of the race, it's as if you're watching it. So I would strive to be a historical narrator like Ed Herman, who is just a great storyteller. I would love to do that type of thing. So, but they've all been done and better than I could.
You've talked almost exclusively about narrating English language books. Have you done works in translation? And is that different in any way?
So I think it is because of the pronunciations. I had just read The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which is quite beautiful. I haven't heard that narrated, but it seems to me the style, certainly in reading it, the style is clearly less American to me in the way that the book is written, the way it's broken up. I think there is a book like Basho, some of his literature from Japanese. It is difficult. I think you also have to work with the translator to get the idea of what the intention is, because a lot of words and concepts do not necessarily translate from the original Japanese into the American. And so he's playing with the word that is not necessarily the most accurate word that the author wanted. I do think there's a difference. I have not done any books that have been translated. There's a huge market, though. Let me tell you what the huge market is romance. And by romance, I don't mean romance. I mean, the XXX romance. That market is huge. And I think people like to have the audiobooks because they don't have to go to the store and buy them, I think. But that is an enormous market, and it's there. But, so then now that the kids are out of the house, our kids are in college, I think I'm able to sit in a closet in a box in the room and tell dirty stories without getting looked at funny. Otherwise people would go, "Oh, Dad." So that might be my next push, right? I don't know.
Oh, well, Tony, it has been an absolutely wonderful hour. I've laughed and laughed. You are a fine narrator, and you are a really wonderful part of Village Voices. As we end, then, let me remind everyone that on May 9, it's a Monday, we are going to have Jeffrey Cabaservice talking about the paths for the party and the roads of the Republicans. So join us next May, and let's all thank Tony again.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Trudy. And thank you, everybody, for listening or putting up with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.